in this room for about the last 5 years, following the giant footsteps of Pam Fessler, who's here somewhere. Yeah, exactly. I want to give her a round of applause. But yeah, 5 years covering voting has simultaneously felt like a very short amount of time, and also I've gotten to watch like 6 evolutions in all of your jobs in the last few years, and following 2016, and election interference, and cybersecurity, and Russia. And then 2020, when there was this giant conversation over how are we going to hold many elections all at once, or how are we going to pay for hand sanitizer, how are we going to pay for masks, how are we going to get poll workers? And then the last 2 years, obviously, we've seen this basically become an information war, where we have tens of millions of Americans who do not trust the validity of American elections, and that has had ripple effects for everybody. It's had ripple effects in the media, it's had ripple effects for state legislators and election officials. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is the most important people in voting, the people at the state and local level. So to do that, we have a great panel here today. I'm just going to give real quick introductions for everybody we've got, and then I'm going to get out of the way and just let them kind of take over. We've got Pennsylvania State Senator David Argall. He represents 260,000 people in northeastern Pennsylvania. He served as the chairman of the Senate State Government Committee for the 2021-2022 legislative session, with oversight over election law and constitutional amendments. And he has often described this work as working in a chamber filled with gas fumes with several open flames burning nearby. Judd Choate is the state election director of Colorado and the former president of the National Association of State Election Directors. He has a law degree from the University of Colorado and a PhD from Purdue University. And fun fact, he used to be a baseball scout for the Kansas City Royals. Kathryne Harper is the executive director of the Missouri Association of County Clerks and Election Authorities. A former election official herself, Kathryne began her current job this year to help clerks in Missouri to organize and become more active specifically with state legislation. She served on the ESC Board of Advisors and has taught election administration courses at the University of Missouri Honors College. And last but certainly not least, North Carolina State Senator Natalie Murdock represents District 20 in North Carolina, which encompasses Durham County. Prior to her current elected office, Murdock served in a number of positions within government in North Carolina, most recently as the Deputy Director of Communication for the North Carolina Department of Justice, and she also worked on the Biden-Harris 2020 campaign in North Carolina. So thank you guys all for being here. I'm really excited to talk through some of this stuff. Also, I'm going to give a couple reminders. We are going to have a Q&A with everybody in the room here at the end after we've chatted for a little while. But everybody who's watching on the live stream, please feel free to send your questions via the YouTube chat, or you can also tweet a question with hashtag ElectionSummit2022. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll make sure to get those questions in too. So I want to start with all of you guys. We talked a little bit before this panel started. And I think one of the interesting things, voting has become such a polarized, nationalized issue that feels existential, feels like the two parties can never agree on anything. And yet in each one of your states, there has been an example of some sort of bipartisan compromise on election issues. I kind of want to just go down the line and have you talk through those, and then we can kind of center in on some specific issues. So Senator, if you want to start.
Sure. The first one that we thought we had an agreement on was voter ID. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, the governor vetoed it. So that one was the almost, but not quite. But the one that finally did get through this session on a pretty considerable bipartisan vote, and understand Pennsylvania divided government, okay? Democratic executive, Republican majorities in the legislature in this last session, was to outlaw the dark money. After the whole Zuckerbucks issue, there were a lot of people on both sides saying, look, there needs to be a better way to fund our elections at the local and the county level than, you know, money coming from not quite sure where. And so the deal was, however, and the administrators will appreciate this, said, okay, but if you're taking that money away, where the hell is the money going to come from? And so we came up with a grant program to make sure that the local administration was funded. That one did pass the House, did pass the Senate, and glory be, the governor signed it. And so there's one example where we got something good accomplished.
Our example would be Colorado had an insider threat issue that arose after the 2020 election. where we had 2 county clerks, one very visibly and one less visibly, who broke into their own systems, their own voting systems, and in doing so, accessed and made copies of the underlying data in those systems, in addition to the kinds of information that you would retain just as in the natural course of business after an election. So we passed an insider threat bill that made it illegal to access the components of your voting system if you're not permitted to do so, to change or alter your voting system, to disobey the orders of the Department of State, including orders related to election security or security related to the voter registration database. It also required certification of those people who run our elections. So if you were a DEO, a designated election official in our state, you have to take 13 classes ranging from as short as a half an hour to as long as 4 hours plus to be certified to run an election, and then you have to keep your certification up to be able to maintain your ability to run elections. So we had that insider threat bill. That was a bipartisan bill. We also had a bill to protect our elections officials. So if you think about it, we were protecting the systems from the election officials, and then we were protecting the elections officials from everybody else. So we had sort of the 2 sides of that coin. And that prevented or prevents doxing of election officials, which is putting your information out on the internet in a way that's designed to harass or intimidate you. And then some other things like your ability to take your information off of public websites, take it out of the public view if you're an election official. Before that bill, I had to demonstrate that I was under threat to be able to do that. Now I can just do it because I'm an official in elections. So those were ways in which we were able to bring together Democrats and Republicans to find good courses to help protect our elections.
Kathryne.
So in Missouri, probably the best way to explain bipartisanship is that we had a bill that passed that coupled photo ID along with 2 weeks of no excuse absentee voting. And we coupled it together so that if it was thrown out by the courts, both would be thrown out. And it came through, and our election administrators did a great job in the 11th hour of getting that bill implemented in Missouri. Outside of the legislature, bipartisanship exists in our association because we have Democratic and Republican election directors and county clerks in Missouri, and we get together in a bipartisan fashion. A lot of us don't even realize the party that we're with, and we work together to bring election administration to the forefront in the legislature.
Yeah, in North Carolina, luckily, we do have a great example. Really, at the height of COVID, we were able to work in a bipartisan fashion in a number of ways. Even the budget we passed at that time was unanimous, which definitely does not happen a lot. To give the composition of North Carolina divided government, we have a Democratic governor, Republican majorities in the House and Senate, and at the time we were able to uphold vetoes in the House and Senate. Now in the Senate, we're in the super minority by 1. But the bipartisan election bill really was because of COVID, and we really were able to come together. We provided more funding, as you mentioned earlier, to our boards of elections that just did not have the financing that they needed to try to administer an election when you wanted safety. Those masks and gloves and hand sanitizer you mentioned are very real concern. Being able to pay our poll workers more, knowing that a lot of seniors just were not comfortable serving as administrators. And when I talk about administrators, we have them here today, but my father was one for 20 years. He was chief precinct judge, and there was no way, that he was comfortable being out there, being 70 plus years old. A lot of those workers are older, so we really, really wanted to not only recruit younger workers, but make sure those seniors felt comfortable being there to kind of, get more folks interested in doing that work. Another really big one for us, we do have absentee voting in North Carolina, have for some years. So really in part to a lot of nonpartisan organizations in North Carolina, far too many to name, you are able to register and vote on the same day for early voting. We have a pretty expansive early voting window, so we knew we wanted to preserve that. But with COVID, we were really concerned about the absentee ballots. You needed 2 witnesses to turn those ballots in. Again, with COVID, what if you lived alone? What if you're not comfortable getting those signatures? So we were able to get that down to 1 witness that would have to sign that ballot, which was a huge, huge win for us in North Carolina. I think another big one was the mail. You would receive those ballots for a few days after, as long as they were postmarked by election day, then those votes would count. So we did have a bipartisan omnibus bill in North Carolina at the height of 2020 that we were very excited about, but with the caveat, what was concerning is we had a voter ID case. We don't currently utilize voter ID in North Carolina. It was included in a constitutional amendment, but the court said that it was too aggressive, and what was slipped into the bipartisan bill was voter ID availability for those. You could utilize it if you were on public assistance. And you may say, oh, no, that's great, but we knew that that was added in there because of that case that was already being litigated. So that piece of it was added in there as well.
I want to start, we're going to talk about all of your individual states, but I feel like as a voting reporter, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Pennsylvania, and I think a lot of people in this room have probably spent a lot of time thinking about Pennsylvania and election laws. Specifically because I'm curious to hear your perspective, Senator, on the election law that wasn't passed. Since 2020, we've been talking a lot about how local election administrators in Pennsylvania cannot process mail ballots before Election Day. And this led to a lot of fear before this election that it was going to take days, right? And obviously that did not come to pass. But I guess, A, from your perspective, why hasn't the legislature done this thing that most other states do? And then B, is there any chance in the next couple years that the legislature will allow county clerks to do that work?
We will certainly try again. I had introduced the bill with my minority chairman. Sharif Street is the Democratic chairman of my committee. He and I could not have more different districts. I'm rural, upstate. My county, I think Donald Trump carried every single precinct in 2016. Teddy Roosevelt didn't do that. Abraham Lincoln didn't do that. And so he's also chairman of Democratic State Committee. So he and I come from very different perspectives. On this issue, we agreed. Put it in, couldn't get it out of committee because it's very hard to get one thing done on election reform. Lots of well-meaning people come in and say, how about this? And the more you tack on, eventually the thing just died of its own weight. And that's what happened to us there.
So is that this is going to happen in the next couple of years or not?
Stay tuned.
Okay. On that point that you touch on, I think I've talked about this with Kathryne earlier this morning. With elections, the rural-urban divide feels like a real, it almost feels like in some cases, election officials have the same title but completely different jobs. How do you guys deal with trying to represent all of the different interests of these election officials? Judd and Kathryne, if you want to start.
Well, I'll just say that, and I may be stealing Kathryne's answer here, but we have a really strong association, and that association sort of breaks down those large to small, both geographic and population differences. The association and the state find that we're in opposition, a quarter of the time or so, and it's always a little difficult when you are in opposition because then you're not giving a clear direction for legislators and for policymakers who are trying to figure that stuff out. But 3/4 of the time, 2/3 of the time, we are in very close alignment. And on the need for all of the counties to sort of operate on the same, in the same ways and have the same resources and implement policies in the same kinds of ways, we're very much in alignment. And for that reason, we're able to work together and get policies passed that could really help all the counties, also get them to do the things that we need them to do in approximately the same way. So, for instance, we get sued a lot in elections. When we get sued, they don't usually pick off people. The suits that we get are not about this county is doing it wrong. It's about your state is doing it wrong. And the reason why that it's not a county-specific thing is we're typically doing it about the same way. And so I think that that helps us in the long run.
I'm going to take a moment and just give a shout out to the Colorado Association of County Clerks and the executive director, Matt Crane. He's been a mentor and you guys do an excellent job in Colorado and in Ohio with Aaron Okerman. So Missouri this year has, for the first time, joined just a handful of states of creating the position of executive director, and I'm the first one. And that's something that we've really worked on because there is the dynamic between the rural and urban population, between funding and not funding, between running only elections and also being a county clerk where you're the chief budget officer, chief financial officer, and you're also the person at the end of the day who may be cleaning the toilets, right? And so how do you bring that together in order to make sure that citizens have the same experience across the state, right? So when they go to the polls, it's similar. They have the same access. And it's been difficult. It's been really difficult. And it's something that is contentious in our state, but in our association, but we work together to try to find that. And some of our greatest ideas come from our urban communities in Kansas City and St. Louis. They have these great ideas. They're so creative. They're able to go to election center. They're able to bring that back. And the rural communities who don't have the same access to education can implement them. So I wouldn't be here today without that, collaboration. But it is really important to discuss.
Senators, I'm curious, when you talk to voters in your communities, what do they tell you about how confident they are or not confident in the current election system? What are you hearing in your communities?
Yeah, it really is a mixed bag, and I'm glad you opened it up with it's really concerning to me. I'm been voting in North Carolina, since 18. I'm now 38. And it's just really concerning to me that so many folks do not have faith in our electoral system. And I think for me as an elected official, I take it very seriously. And I'm not okay with folks making things up. I'm not okay with folks saying things that they know that are false. And it really, really needs to stop. I just wish we had more leaders with the integrity to say, I lost, I'm gonna pack up and go home, and that's okay. It's okay, that is your right. But I do hear from voters all the time that do have those serious concerns, that don't trust the process. And it's nothing that's gonna change overnight. I think it's just gonna take time. But I will say for me, I think this cycle went better than I thought. I was really concerned about what was gonna happen when we received our election results. Luckily in North Carolina, we do a ton of mail-in voting, but we count those as they come in. Our results come in pretty quickly. We actually did have a cyber scare in 2016 that I was sharing with some of the panelists in my county. In Durham County, we are a very blue county, so we were targeted then. And also your point about that urban-rural divide, because our county is one of the larger counties, the county commissioners provided the funding needed to say we will secure everything. We have a phenomenal director, so we have faith in our systems, but I'm seeing more of elected officials alleging that things are occurring that aren't occurring, and I don't think that's helpful to citizens having faith in that system.
We go Professor Argall on you.
Yeah, please.
I've taught some classes back home for Penn State, and there's a thing called Miles's Law of Governmental Behavior, which essentially indicates where you stand depends on where you sit. And so for a state senator, if your constituents are not happy, you better not be happy. And so for the last 2 years, it's been brutal. I've told any number of folks, I literally could not walk my dog in my own neighborhood without people complaining to me about things that they had thought or feared or heard that had gone wrong with the administration of several elections. The other day, one of my neighbors complained to me about property taxes. I wanted to hug him. So I do think maybe that cycle has started to decrease a bit, and perhaps people, because I mean, when people don't trust the administration, the elections, results, I mean, that's fundamental. That strikes at the whole core of the system. And so it's been bad, but I hope that we're working our way through it.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask, is I have been hearing in my conversations over the last couple of weeks since this election, optimism in a way that I have not heard in years. But what does this say for 2024? Has the fever broken on a lot of this election denial?
We'll see. But I mean, and this goes back years. I was still in the House, so this is at least 13 years ago. I was the whip, the assistant leader. The leader was off doing budget negotiations, and one of our members brought up a bill that none of us had ever heard of before. It was a floor amendment for voter ID. It was the very first time it had ever been discussed. In our caucus, like, yeah, go ahead, throw it up there. We brought it up to the floor. The other side, is batshit crazy a technical term? I mean, the other side really went crazy. And I remember the leader coming back to me and saying, Argall, what did you do? I was like, sorry, boss. And so I think that was the first idea that we had, that some of these issues that to one side look like motherhood and apple pie, the other side doesn't look at them that way at all. And so it's been going for a while, but yeah, I do think we're probably going to move on to at least some other issues, as well as maybe try to track down some of the answers on the elections as well. We're not going to just be focused on that.
I'd love to be complaining about property taxes right now. I'm also an accountant, right? And I'm a little bit optimistic, but we talked about this at dinner last night. You know, I think the rhetoric is still here, and there may be some groups that have lost some steam, but it's seeped into the average citizen. So when you're sitting at the Thanksgiving table, your uncle's going to chime in and say, hey, tell me a little bit more. I think that some of the stuff, I watched this movie and I think that might be true, and I bought a pillow, right? And it's scary because this is your family. These are your friends, and suddenly you're losing that trust and they're affecting you. I'm sure it's your father has heard some of it too, and it's hard. That trust is going to take time to bring back. So while maybe some of the more active actors are slowing down a little bit, I think the long-term damage, if that's the right word, has been there. So it's up to us to make sure that we still build that confidence, continuing to get people involved, continuing to get election administrators at the table, continuing to build trust in our communities.
For a while, to be a successful election administrator was kind of like, do your job, and if no one talks about you, that means you did a really good job. I feel like the fact that your job exists at all, as like you were like basically saying, no, I need to be a megaphone for these people. How is it kind of emblematic of how the job or the responsibilities of election administrators has changed?
You know, I think that it's changed significantly. It's put a lot of weight on individuals that, in our association, a lot of us are introverts, right? We're quiet. We're more like accountants. Maybe not Judd. But, you know, and it's brought a lot of attention to them, and that they're feeling this and carrying it, and it's made the conversation about self-care and mental health really important too, right? But we go back to education and transparency. Let's get engaged. Let's get our community engaged. Let's get deniers engaged. Let's get our legislature engaged. We want you there hand counting, right, when we're at pre-testing and post-testing. And I don't know where the conversation is going from here. And so that's why I love opportunities like this. And I'm so grateful to be here. Shout out, thank you to BPC for hosting. Because this is information that we're able to bring back to our states and communities.
Judd, have you felt like the job of election administrator has shifted since you went into this field?
Oh, absolutely. It's like every time you turn around, you have to develop a new skill. If you think about like what's happened in the last 20 years, I haven't been in it for 20 years, but if you go back to 2000, a bunch of people that were really not trained to be sophisticated technologists suddenly had to become them. And then as we got past 2000 and into the certification of equipment and buying equipment, and then you have the MOVE Act, and you really gets us into a different kind of technology for military and overseas act, for military and overseas voters. And then the Russians hit. Suddenly we have to become intelligence folks, and we have to have a much different level of understanding of technology. And then denialism. It's just, I mean, honestly, it makes your head spin. We're all moving. We're finding ourselves adjusting really at a level that we're not able to sort of educate ourselves on, because you can't even build that infrastructure in your own office, because there may not be that talent available to go out and bring in an election security person, or bring in somebody who is really good at audits, because those people don't grow on trees. So it's been very difficult. I would say though that there is help out there. There are associations. I'm in a great association, the National Association of State Election Directors. There are other great associations that many people that are in elections are in. And there's the federal government. If the federal government would give us the kinds of resources that we need, they've made some, halting attempts to do that without much success. I would suggest to my friends and colleagues in that world that they should try harder.
As you mentioned, election administration, very complicated, even for people who are spending all of their time thinking about it. You're still having to learn a new skill every week or every month. For legislators, how hard is it you guys are in charge of writing the rules for how these people operate these systems. I guess how hard has it been to get up to speed and feel like you have a good enough understanding of these issues to be able to say how they're going to work?
Honestly, it's a lot of events like this. More v. Harper is going on actually in my state, so I'm actually looking forward to that workshop later on today. So we're constantly taking in information. We're constantly talking with attorneys, election officials, constantly just kind of taking in all of that information, because I think you summed it up perfectly. So much of it has changed even since I've been a legislator. I came in 2020 during COVID. Who would have known you had to figure out how to legislate an election during a global pandemic? I mean, that's just something that you do not learn in your orientation as a legislator. You just have to kind of figure it out and really say, what makes the most sense and try to do the best that you can. But luckily, or I shouldn't say luckily. So in North Carolina, since we don't have term limits, we do still have a lot of folks who have been working on this for years and decades even. Our minority leader previously was Speaker of the House many moons ago. So that wealth of knowledge that we have within our caucus not only makes it really, really helpful. One specific example I'll use, one of our veterans on the floor, there was a bill, North Carolina's version of election integrity bill, would have said that if your ballot was turned in after 5 p.m. by mail, that they wouldn't, that vote wouldn't count. And immediately, our veteran legislators were able to file an amendment to say, well, wait a minute, what if you're physically voting and you're there and in line by 7:30, you can still vote. So why would it be different if it's mail, especially coming off of how slow the mail was? But at any rate, those are examples where, particularly when you're in the minority, you have to be very quick on your feet. So I think it's not only constantly learning, it's always being ready for not knowing what the strategy is going to be. You have to just be quick. And in North Carolina, what we've done is really look at other states. Like the election integrity legislation, we knew it was coming. Other states already had it. So we're constantly, honestly looking to see what's going on in other states so that we can be prepared to have a good defense in North Carolina.
I mean, I don't have to tell any of you, it's wicked complicated and it's controversial. Several years ago, we had a bill that we thought moved the elections processes ahead on a bipartisan manner in Pennsylvania. The Republicans, there was no discussion about drop boxes. Department of State and the governor read the bill. I said, oh yeah, see that word? It's in there. And we're like, whoa. Courts agreed with the governor. And so there was a major change that was made that the legislature did not believe it had made. And so words matter, details matter. I don't remember now if it was a signature or a date issue. We had a very, very close state Senate election 2 years ago out in the Pittsburgh suburbs. One county said, we're going to do it this way. The next county in the same Senate district said, no, we're going to do it another way. You can understand how that can make people very, very anxious. And the courts, state Supreme Court said, bad idea, we're going to let it go this time, don't do it again. Not exactly a ringing ruling. We appealed it to the federal Supreme Court, and they said, nah, we don't want to deal with it. And so it really does matter where you put that comma, and hope to God that the word that you're using in the statute is one that the justices will agree with you on. So no, it's hairy.
I want to open up to questions. Anyone in the room have a question for our fine panelists? Yeah. Do we have a microphone, or should we? Up in the front. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Andy Craig, I'm with the Rainey Center. One of the biggest, it kind of flew under the radar, but administration fiascos we had this year was Michigan with the petitions for the Republican primary for governor. And so both kind of on the administrative side and on the legislative side, I wonder if that's something that's come up in terms of looking at options for the number of signatures required, the process of verifying, rules about petitioners, and if there's any possibility for, hopefully some bipartisan action on that. Matters more in some states than others. I know Colorado has very easy.
I'll just say that that's pretty much the toughest job that any elections administrator does, because there's really no way to get it right. You are either accepting signatures or accepting entries that somebody else doesn't think you should, or you're disallowing people who are just trying to, further their democratic principles by signing on a form, and you are rejecting it for some arbitrary reason. I mean, the two sides are really aggressive, frankly, our laws, I think, are very similar as in other states, and that is that we have strict compliance, but then the courts can look at this and they don't have as tight a compliance. They can have a compliance which sort of, is more flexible. And so we see something and we say, no, that doesn't meet our very exacting standards, and then the court can say, no, that's close enough. So we find ourselves in that sort of difficult position, and I think a lot of states are in that position. But you all should know that figuring out who can get on the ballot and how they get on the ballot and so forth is really complicated, really difficult. It involves a lot of people who are largely out of our control. And we've discovered over the last several years several instances of fraud where people go through the phone book and they just add people's names, and they're brazen enough about it that they'll do them in the same script, page after page after page. And you can spot them, but then some of them are smart enough to do them only on line 13 every page and pass it around. They have a signature party. This stuff is really hard, and frankly, there are software solutions out there, but again, no money to do that kind of upgrade to be able to match software with the need. So that is a really difficult problem that we struggle with.
Again, the details are going to matter. The only time that I remember the subject of petitions coming before the legislature, I was still in the House. I need 500 signatures to get on the ballot to represent a 250,000 people. That doesn't sound like that big a deal, except there are some Senate districts where it's really hard to find 500 Republicans. So the bill that came forth, I think, said that, there's some kind of percentage that if it's really, really hard, hopefully we said it better than that, you could have a lower number. But we were accused of being racists because it really, if you look at where it impacted, it did help Republicans in heavily Democratic seats in Philadelphia, where quite honestly, unless there's a miracle, we're not going to win anyway, but we can't even get people on the ballot. And so we thought we had a solution. It went nowhere.
Your question?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, folks. Jaden Klubeck from the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream, and I'm curious to ask, since we have legislators and administrators on the panel, what do you see as the benefits and the drawbacks and just the logistics of making Election Day a holiday for both state parties and state elections, federal elections, and just how did you reach that conclusion yourself? Thank you.
I have an opinion.
I see.
No, it's a bad idea, and the reason why it's a bad idea is because you lose a lot of your workers then. So who is going to run your polling places if they have a holiday and they get that day off from work already? And we're all looking for younger and more sophisticated people who can operate technology. You're going to struggle to find those people when that's a day off from work for them. If it's something that they can, work with their bosses to make sure that they, get that day just to do their public service, that's different. And we're a state that most of our voters vote by mail, and so, or at least get a mail ballot and then they vote them in a drop box. So we don't really even need that many polling places. We had 366 polling places in the entire state of Colorado in the just finished general election. So, if there's 10 people in each one of those locations, we only need a couple of thousand people. I mean, we need 3,500 people or so. And then you have people working behind the scenes. But if you think about it, and a state where there's a lot of polling places, who's going to be in those polling places if you make it a holiday and make it so much more difficult for those people to come and work on that day?
One of the things in Missouri we started was 2 weeks of no excuse absentee voting, and that's big for our state because Missourians are against early voting. So by expanding Election Day and allowing more opportunity for people to come forward, we found that to be really beneficial as election administrators, because a lot of individuals who need to change an address or maybe their process is going to be a little bit longer, they can come beforehand on those few days. And so I don't want to speak from our membership on a holiday because that's something for them to consider, but we seem to be going in favor of expanding it versus keeping it to one day.
Yeah, in North Carolina, we have filed that legislation a number of times. I think earlier, the good senator out of Pennsylvania used a really good example with a lot of our election bills. The ones that move forward are omnibus bills, but we still have specific legislation around these sorts of issues where we don't have a consensus. But I filed it simply because before becoming a state senator, I also was first vice chair of my county Democratic Party. And every single, and precinct chair, I'm still precinct chair. I don't know how that happened. So I'm still chair of my precinct. But they got together and said, we decided on this. I'm like, but you didn't consult me. But at any rate, every single election, towards the end of Election Day, there are always individuals, wrong precinct, and in North Carolina, if you show up on Election Day and you're at the wrong precinct, you have to vote a provisional ballot, which is treated differently. It is what it is. And unfortunately, what I'm really concerned about, I think a lot of folks just end up not voting. So for me, the reason that, but I do thank you for that different viewpoint of the staffing. So if we were to work through that, just a little bit more about my background. I mean, I basic, regular middle class background, but before that, my grandmother was a cafeteria worker. So with the labor work that I've done, I'm still concerned about folks that only have, that 1 hour lunch break. And if the line is really long, or if there is an issue with an address, or which actually happened on one of our campuses. We have a lot of college campuses in North Carolina. And at one of our historically black colleges, we actually had over 100 students that had an address issue. And even though they were students, what if that's just a person that comes to vote? And so I like the idea of it because it gives you more time to work through those issues. And specifically in North Carolina, the reason that that's relevant is a lot of our elections are very close. Our Chief Justice in 2020 only lost by 401 votes. So I believe in making it easier to vote, because when you shave off, for whatever reason, 5 votes here, 10 votes there, 20 votes there at the precinct level, when you add that up, it has very, very real consequences. So it is legislation that I've filed in 2 sessions to make it a holiday.
I've got, oh, yeah, there we go.
Hi, I'm Matt Germer from the R Street Institute. I'd like to do a little cross-pollination, if I could, between panels. From the one I was on earlier today, we talked about federal involvement in elections, or to what extent that should happen, particularly around funding. I would like to ask this panel, your viewpoint, funding for elections comes at different levels, counties, states, federal government. What is the right mix to you, and what role should the federal government play in state and local budget making when it comes to elections?
That's a good question.
I think as administrators, we just want to see it funded, right? So this last year in Missouri, nonprofit and third-party money was taken away. The state did, for the first time, come in and promise to bring some funding, but a lot of our federal dollars do get caught up at the state level, and it doesn't come down to us. So we just want to make sure we have enough money to do what we need to do to have safe, secure elections. I don't know if we're necessarily too concerned about the source.
I'll tell you my real estate perspective on this, which is that when a Colorado county creates a ballot, they work with their city, their school board, their special district, their county to build that ballot. And there are spaces on the ballot for each one of those jurisdictions, and they have to buy that space. And if you have this much space on that ballot, it costs this much. And if you have 20,000 people that goes to and it's this much space, then that's the calculation. Well, I think the federal government has the best real estate on the ballot. It's right up front, it's right on the top, it's the big chunk of it, and they don't pay a dime for it. And everybody else in that equation pays for that real estate. And they should be paying for that real estate. And it would also create a really nice continuous money. Like we would get it for every federal election, and you could map out what you're going to use that money for. Because right now, we have no idea when we're going to get money. We might get money next month, who knows? Yeah. We may not get money next month. But and often there are deadlines on the use of that money. You have to use it in 5 years. You have to use it in 1 year. The CARES money came, and we had like 9 months to be able to spend it. True. So you can't plan, you can't budget when the money comes in that kind of weirdly organic way. You need to have something that's solid, that you can depend on, and that you can plan based on. And if they would just pay for the real estate on the ballot that they consume, then we would have that sure funding source, and we would be able to use it over time. So that would be my suggestion to the federal government.
I wanted to add, I think that's also relevant to the discussion earlier when you talk about urban-rural divide. I mean, I'm in my new district, I have South Durham County, but all of Chatham County, so I can see the differences. So the Research Triangle Park, Duke University are my district, so we're a district that has a lot of money. So our county commission, they're in a position to say, oh, we'll pay for it. If there's issues, we literally can put millions of dollars into this. Those rural, smaller counties, they don't have the budgets to do that. So I also think when you talk about equity and safety and making sure things are done the right way, having that funding really is critical. In North Carolina, we didn't move forward with the legislation that was going around nationwide for various reasons around nonprofit funding. They're still able to do that. But we know that the need is there, because it does require more sophistication, more skill. And I love that real estate example, particularly with the drop-off, right? I mean, how many elections you definitely know more than anyone where they vote at the top and then just leave. So they should pay for that. Yeah. They should pay for being on the top, the top of that ballot there. I think there should be some federal coordination of some sort for funding.
Any last words, Senator?
Just that whole interplay between what the states should do, what the federal government could do. We're always complaining in the legislature that the feds make all these rules about education, and then they fund about this tiny piece of education, and we're stuck. So I guess I'd just be careful. I guess the major case now pending before the United States Supreme Court on that whole argument between state and federal government, the courts, the legislature. I would just be nervous that if they start to send us money, they might have some ideas on telling us what to do, 23 hours a day as well.
Great. All right, well, thank you guys so much for watching. That was fantastic. Thanks to our panelists.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
That went fast.